All right, so this is just really, really quick because there's just too much to talk about here and the topic's too big. I'm going to start off by saying that FCM is wonderful. And if there's anybody on the call here from FCM, then my thanks to you guys again. 2019, 2020, we did this monster study with FCM, had about 50 different cities involved, primarily the four that you see on the screen. And we were looking at not funding particularly, but funding came up as part of this study. So that link is also on the last slide here. And one of the things that we were looking at is how to enable net zero energy construction and what is the role of the municipality. Personally, you'll see it in my bio, I spent a lot of time on net zero energy, particularly at the community level. I am half my life, I'm a builder and a developer. The other half of my life, I'm a consultant. I spend a good chunk of my time in the NGO world working on policy. So we've run into a little bit of everything. And when we did this study, the goal was to try to enable municipalities to understand their role, to understand where they can help, to understand where they may inadvertently hurt the process. And we came up with a whole bunch of unsurprising conclusions. First and foremost is that the technology is rote, it's done, people have figured it out. Figuring out how to make that affordable is a different thing. So first, in a three-legged stool kind of an effort, first leg of the stool is the technology, done, solved. Second leg is finance and anything financially related. Third leg is policy and process and trying to get a permit or an approval, which is not in our scope for this presentation, but you can imagine there's a lot to talk about there. When we were talking about funding and finance models, these are the themes. On this slide, these are the themes that we came up with. And they were pretty broad and comprehensive themes. They sort of covered everything. And we could break down every financial challenge, every development project found into one of these four things, that there are ways basically to reduce expenses. You can eliminate redundancy. You can do a lot of engineering studies. You can offset expenses with creative processes and policies, sometimes things like net metering, sometimes incentives and grants. You can externalize the expenses. I do some microgrid work. That's a huge and interesting discussion that is ever growing. And then non-traditional methods of finance, and guess what? That's where PACE and other things like PACE fit in. So we had some really interesting discussions around what is PACE. It has multiple names. Some of you have heard of PACE funding before. You may or may not have heard of PAPER or GMM, Green Municipal Mortgages. These are all the same thing. PAPER meaning property assessed payments for energy retrofits. And there are several other versions of the same acronym. You can see reductions is on this screen. The idea is public policy holders, public entities, public institutions and arms of government have an entirely different reach into the finance market than the private sector does. And if I, as a homeowner, am looking for a creative loan so I can put $50,000 worth of energy retrofits into my house because I'm morally bought in, but I don't have the money, I have access to very much fewer resources than certain public institutions do. So can we structure a public program around these realities, leverage the fact that there's money out there if you know how to use it, and if you're credible and trustworthy with it, if you've got good credit ratings, if you've got good internal diligence, if you've got good governance, and then put a program in place so that the public instruments, the public players can use their cloud, use their processes to support something that enables the $50,000 home retrofits. So most of you have probably heard about this by now. The slide that you're looking at right now is a rehashing of research that I did in 2012, and I was by no means the only person thinking about it then. So this is not a new topic, and unfortunately, it's still not done very well. So for today, we're just sort of introducing the topic, and there's a lot we can talk about in the question and answer period. I'm hoping to get us there fairly quickly. But the idea here is use the institution that has access to money, put a due process around that. There's a flow chart on here. You can keep a copy of this when you get my slides later. There are some road steps you can go through. You can programatize this. So the real interesting question is, why hasn't it been done? And what is it that we need to learn as an industry? I was trying to get through my slides in 5 minutes. So here's my contact info, and then I'm going to cut my slides and I'm going to share the time, and we're going to talk more in the question and answer period. But I think there's a lot we can talk about here that is very much on the practical side. I'm going to suggest there are at least 20 municipalities in Canada who have given this a try. They've got to different stages, each of them. Sometimes they've defined core things very differently. The way that you define the problem redefines what kind of solution you're going to be able to come up with. And if you don't define the problem carefully, you can really pigeonhole yourself quickly, and you can get into all kinds of trouble that you didn't even think was real. What I have seen most common in the public space right now, when PACE funding of various forms have been implemented, is a lack of actual money. Yeah, they'll put in a decent budget to get started, but they're public. They have a limit to the amount of funds they can use. So when they throw their funds in the pot and then they introduce the program to their local utility and they publicize this to, however many people the utility want to publicize it to, there are moments when you can talk, and then moments later, the money's gone. It's spent. $1 million goes very quickly in $50,000 home retrofits. And if you open this up to commercial players, it's even quicker. So the reality is it takes a lot of money to make this work. And that is usually the problem with the public side of this. The US, we've got Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that have done their own versions. And we can talk about how that worked down there and why it worked differently. And I got a lot more to say, but this is kind of like jumping the tips of icebergs. So there's a quick, almost unfairly quick introduction to what is PACE funding. Where could we spend our time focusing right now? I would suggest there are tools available that we can use and that we can build from. And if you are a municipality, or if you are an NGO in a local municipality where you have somebody's ear and you're trying to make this practical in your neck of the woods, the discussion gets most meaningful and most closest to ground, most actionable, when you can build off strengths that you already have. So for example, most municipalities in Canada now already have pretty good experience around the idea of energy retrofits. They've got local auditors who have done this before. They've got home inspectors who are literate. They understand the topic. There's going to be niche things they understand better than other things, and they're not an expert in everything, and that's fine. But if you can work with the local teams that you have, figure out what their strengths and expertises are, and then build from there. Because this takes a bit of a village to be able to do this right. It does take money, but it also, three-legged stool, it does take money, but it also takes some knowledge of the technology and how you can best apply it. And then it also takes policy and process. It takes people who can administer this and figure out what the steps are. And it has to make money at the end of the day, even though we don't like to think money makes the world go around. We're in a capitalist economy. So truly and truly, money is what makes the world go around, like it or lump it. So what that ends up meaning is that we have to think very carefully about how to cover the public purse. And if we're going to put public dollars into this, we got to make them back. That's the beauty of the PACE funding. The public entity, which creates the loan, makes the money available, also takes out a lien on the property. So before the loan can go anywhere, they have to know that there's enough of that property paid off that there's room to register the lien. So there's some administration and some due diligence that needs to happen in the background there. But after they've registered that lien, you go ahead and do the project. You can design these projects technically to work. There's a 30-50 discussion out on the internet where you use $30,000 to retrofit for 50% energy efficiency gains. Right now, that will pay for itself pretty much every time. So all it takes is the smart guy in the middle to figure out the 30-50. How do you get a $30,000 project that's going to create 50,000 in energy savings? And I missed the name from the gentleman who asked the question earlier, but there are professionals who have been working with EnerGuide for some time now who are really good at this. And if you give them some license and some space and some time, they can pull from all of the information that Enercan has available on what is now hundreds of thousands of homes. And they can make this easy, and they can put a package together. And once they've got the package together, you just lather, rinse, and repeat. So the goal is, can you make this an easy program to deliver? Then you just have to be able to fund it, which is a lot easier said than done. So what we need in that case is for public pots of money to be available, which you can replenish. You get them paid back on monthly utility bills, put the money out to the homeowners, get the projects happening, get the homeowners paying it back on their utility bill, which means, yes, you need utility partners. Once you've got the partners bought in and they're starting to help pay things back or collect the funds to pay things back, then you need somebody who can buy that whole bundle of debt. That's been part of the problem that we've had in the past. I'm going to run out of time in a second here, so I'm going to pause on that thought. But there are big national agencies that we have here, things like CMHC and Enercan, which can help by either insuring or factoring or underwriting or pulling off that pot of debt, putting it into a bigger pot, which gets paid down and by people repaying their bills. And there's lots of ways to make this work. There's a bit of a magic there. It depends on who you are in the industry. We could talk about that for a while. And that's the magic that has not yet been done well in Canada. They did it in the US. That's why Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac worked. We haven't done that in Canada. We've got a federal government that said they would, but they've said a lot of things, and they've said that multiple times. Conservatives have said it. Liberals have said it. Right now, liberals are still saying it, still not doing it. It's a bit of a politics game. So I am going to be ranting if I go any further. So I'm going to stop right there. I'm out of time. I hope I haven't just shot the fire hose at you too hard. You're all welcome to a copy of my slides, as I said, and hopefully we'll talk about this more in the question period. But this is very much like jumping across the tips of icebergs. There's a lot under the water here. So hope that was a helpful introduction, at least.
Absolutely. Next, we'll be hearing from Zach, and away you go. Okay, yeah, my name is Rempel. I'm at the ISD, the International Institute for Sustainable Development. I did a bunch of research this last year working with the provincial government on PACE, trying to start imagining what a PACE program would look like in the province. Yeah, like Derek said, to just recap really quickly, the idea behind PACE is that instead of asking people to shell out their own money, whatever, 20, 30 grand for retrofits on their home, you make that available to them up front, and then they can just pay it back in installments. And ideally, the savings are so significant that the installments are extremely economical and affordable. So yeah, sorry, I don't have slides here. I'm just gonna kind of share some of the findings that we've had. To start with securing funding, that's really been obviously a pretty significant challenge. Where's the money gonna come from? So if every home is averaging about 20 grand worth of retrofits, $1 million only gets you 50 homes. So a lot of pilot programs that have started in Canada, they started with 100 homes. That's already, you've gone through 2 million right there. Most PACE programs across Canada have launched with the help of the FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. They've done a really good job helping out programs. Like Derek said, he had good things to say about them, and so do I. But the issue is, for this to go mainstream, you need to get beyond the limited pool of a couple million and start really ballooning and getting this going on a large scale. And that's a really difficult step that many PACE programs need to take. Next, we move on to the technical elements of PACE. So in terms of administration, you need to find some kind of organization to administrate the program. So for example, and every PACE program in Canada has kind of approached this a little bit differently. So for example, in Saskatoon, the program is run through the city. In Alberta, it's run through the Alberta Municipalities Organization. So the Manitoba equivalent would be the AMM, the Association of Manitoba Municipalities. Another option is to have a third party run it. And this is all just context dependent. You have to figure out what works best for your local situation, and that's why they look so different across Canada. It gets evaluated on a case by case basis. So when we started doing research into this, we realized that Manitoba already had a kind of PACE style program called not PACE, PACE, but PAYS, Pay As You Save. And this ran for a number of years. It wasn't exactly PACE because it's not attached to the property, which is of course the defining quality of a PACE program, but it was attached to your hydro account. And this ran for a number of years, started in about 2012, and it got shut down a couple of years ago. And it's important to understand a little bit why it didn't work out. And you have to understand the two main fundamental economic components of a PACE program. And that is that number one, the cost of energy there's just the direct financial component, and then there's also the carbon intensity of the electricity. So number one, the money, and number two, the decarbonization. And so in Manitoba, we're in this unique situation where number one, our energy is remarkably cheap. We're either the cheapest or I think the second cheapest last time I checked energy market in Canada. And number two, our electricity is already clean, like 99 or effectively 100% clean in the province from our hydro dams and our wind farms. And what this means is that this puts a lot of economic pressure on the program. If you look at the jurisdictions across Canada that have had the most success with PACE, you find it's Alberta, Saskatchewan, and then Atlantic Canada. And it's not really a coincidence. These are the places where they have disproportionately fossil energy, fossil electricity. So in Saskatchewan, I don't know if everyone knows, but almost half of all electricity produced in Saskatchewan is produced from coal. Alberta's done a better job phasing out coal, but it's largely natural gas powered. And so in these places, switching to clean energy, number one, you get massive carbon savings, which is quite effective. And number two, you can potentially save a lot of money because electricity is just a lot more expensive there. Another drawback to PACE is something that gets talked about at the Sustainable Building Manitoba seminars a lot, is that this idea of deep energy retrofits, that PACE so far are largely for small scale kind of individual retrofits, which are obviously a great short-term and medium step to get people to think more about like fixing their, retrofitting their windows, upgrading their to a high efficiency furnace, things like that. But really to achieve, if we're going to get like serious about achieving our climate targets, we need massive, comprehensive, deep energy retrofit programs. And then the cost balloons, it goes up from 20 grand a house. To do a deep energy retrofit, we're looking at a lot more, well over 100 in many cases for a house. Just to wrap up what I'm saying here in conclusion, I'm not saying PACE doesn't work in Manitoba. What I'm saying is that there are unique economic challenges that have to be taken into consideration as we figure out a financing program here. The next big thing to consider, and the next thing that I'm excited to research moving forward, is figuring out how PACE could work with potentially a deep energy retrofit program, if that would be a suitable funding model, and what that potentially would look like. So yeah, thanks for listening, and yeah, thanks everyone.
All right, thank you both so much. We're gonna move now into the question time. Oops. So do we have any questions from the audience? You can write them in the chat, or you can raise your hand using the hand raise function. Oh, I see one right away. So from DGH Engineering, please. I think it's Stephen.
Second, here we go. Can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent. Okay, so my question was, there was the number of $30,000, and I couldn't tell whether that was for $50,000 in energy savings or for 50% efficiency. I think
Percent efficiency is what I was suggesting. Yeah.
Okay. I think I heard both. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah,
Appreciate
no problem. Yeah, and obviously it's an average factor, but for those of you who have spent a lot of time in the residential renovation space, it's a realistic benchmark that you can run with. It has to be localized. You have to know your local suppliers, but yeah, it's a good target to work with.
Yeah, so that's great. Is there anything that you guys were like, after you finished talking, you're like, shoot, that was on my list to say, and that you really wanted to mention now?
If I had everybody in a room, I would have a bunch of questions for you guys as a crowd. I don't have a good sense for who on this call is municipal or what the sort of mix of skills is here. For PACE to work, you need a village. You need a handful of the right people in each jurisdiction who are invested in the topic morally and who will sit in a room together and figure out the scuttlebutt of the details to just get it done. And then you need to just sit and get it done. So I'm kind of wondering if we've got enough of the right people on the call here that we could surround Zach and get it done.
Yeah, we've got an interesting mix of people here, and I don't know if like this is the exact place, but some of that's what we're going to be talking about for those who are joining us on March 30th, is to see who is around and how we can action plan towards some of these things. So that will be the moment. Obviously, a Zoom call isn't always the best place to try and start a big conversation with over 60 people. But we'll definitely be working on that, because you're right, it does take a village, not just to do as you said, but just everything that we're working on. This is not an individual moment. This is definitely a collective moment.
And I think that's part of the reason why this hasn't succeeded glowingly yet in Canada. The idea is brilliant, and on paper, it absolutely works. It's so strong an argument. It's so simple a mechanic, but it usually runs out of funds fairly quickly, and then it stops dead in its tracks and it can't go any further. So getting it refunded is the issue, and getting enough of the right people around the table where you can have, because the big funders don't want to deal with homeowners. That's way too complicated for them. What they want to deal with is bundles of work that have been pre-parceled. So if they could put $10 million into a pot, let the city spend it reputably with a whole bunch of safeguards in place to make sure it's well spent. And then they'll just buy the whole $10 billion pot of finance off of the city, which means the city has another, sorry, I said billion, I meant million. You get 10 million off of it, and then the city has another 10 million to work with it. You just revolve that and keep it moving. It's easier if you can do that in tranches of 100 million, but 100 million's a lot more homes, and the city gets intimidated by starting with numbers like that. And truthfully, the financiers usually want them to earn that. So there's some process stuff here that needs to be worked through, but It absolutely can be worked through. You just need the right people in the room. So I see Mark Hudson's got a question.
Yeah, Mark, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Laura, and thanks, Derek and Zach. My question is whether or not there are examples of like that are already out there of scaled up PACE models. So, and I guess where does the capitalization for the initial pool come from in those scaled up models? Are these largely publicly capitalized, or are there examples where there's some capacity or effort to draw on private financial markets to capitalize those initial pools?
Yeah, there's a whole mucky discussion to be had here. So Zach, jump in and help out wherever I steer confusion here. But I'm going to suggest Edmonton and Toronto were the two best examples I've seen. Nova Scotia's got a decent program for solar retrofits. Toronto's example ran out of money. So it was funded from the municipal purse. They had some money set aside from land sales and a couple of other things, is my understanding. And they used it well, and then it was done. And Edmonton started with seed funding from FCM. The Green Municipal Fund is such a brilliant tool that municipalities have access to. It really does deserve a lot of credit, but it also has limits. So the seed funding came from there. It was spent well, and then it was spent. So usually the first round is not nearly so complicated as the second round. And the second round is where it sort of dies every time. Figuring out a way to sell the first round, bundle it all together into a fund and sell the fund, and then recapitalize it through the sale. That's where we have fallen short in Canada. The US has a different way of doing that, but they have completely different tax laws. So it's it's significantly different down there financially. Up here, it's not rocket science, but the numbers are not high interest rates. So the private sector is not really excited about it, especially when you've got that many players to deal with. So far, it just hasn't been structured for success. There's too many people who run in their own lane and have not been able to sort of see the broader picture of how this works. It is kind of a big, ugly one to get everybody into the same racetrack together. So there are smaller examples in Canada that are good, but nothing has scaled well yet. I think there's room to challenge that, but the best place to challenge that is at the CMHC, where you've got national reach and big budgets. And Trudeau's team said they were going to do that, and there has been money allocated for it. It's just been slow to come to the ground. And to be honest, I don't know if anybody inside CMHC actually knows what their critical path is to get this deployed.
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I would just kind of reiterate like the Pembina Institute put forward an analysis of PACE, and basically what they found is in America they've managed to successfully privatize a lot of this. It feels like a pretty stereotypical American thing that they've gone. They have like less regulations around this, and this also had a downside. I guess the upside was that they were able to tap into some pretty significant amounts of money, a lot of these American PACE programs, but some of the downsides were that a lot of people got taken advantage of, that they were forced into PACE loans that they couldn't really afford. So I guess there's positives and negatives there, and that also probably could have been mitigated with, better policy and such. But yeah, the question is a good one. How to jump from this initial seed funding? It's pretty easy to get a first couple, 5-10 million from the FCM, and then how to take that and then jump up to the next step. That's the real challenge.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you both for those answers. Well, I feel like we don't see any more questions in the chat. So if you guys have any final comments that you want to make, we'll do that, and then we'll have that moment of Manitoba music again.
I think if I may just suggest that we just leave the door open on this one. This is a great follow-up one for Laura and her team later. But we do need a handful of skills to join the discussion before we can really move this forward. And of course, I'm not a local guy, so I can't help as much as I would like to. I have driven this discussion in some other jurisdictions, and I'd be very happy to support it. I would suggest the critical mass that you really need to start. We need somebody in your market who is on the finance side, maybe a local rep from CMHC. We need somebody in your market who is on the technical side, either tied to NRCan or comfortable with NRCan programs and experienced in those programs, energy modeling, things like that. But they're going to ultimately have to work with NRCan data that's going to come out of the NRCan system. So having some connections up there, I can help with. And we need somebody tied to the local utility. So if Manitoba Hydro was at the table with CMHC and with a couple of local energy people and Laura, that's a start, and we could work from there.
Yeah, no final comments, but thanks everyone for listening. And yeah.
Yeah,
And
well,
Zach might be the administrative agency that we would need to run the whole thing. Hint, hint.
hint taken. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much, Derek and Zach, for this. This was like really interesting. One of the things that Derek had said that really inspired me was somebody needs to do it first, and then it will be easier for other people to do it next. And in Manitoba, we do have the legacy of the pay for your furnace that people used to be run by hydro. So there is some familiarity in this province for, so maybe it's us. We'll see.